Hi, my name is James Hoot, and I went vegan in 2017. I went vegetarian originally after watching Kip Anderson's Cowspiracy, which was a highly inspirational film for many of us.
When was that?
That would have been 2016. 2006. I was vegetarian for about a year. I really resonated with that movie because I was always someone, I got made fun of quite a bit when I was at uni because I would make sure to recycle everything, and my friends would always make fun of me. There's even like a old video that we made as a joke of like me being recycling man or something like that, like a superhero. And I risked my life in this little short film we made, jumping into the ocean to save like a single plastic bottle. And it was like in winter and everything. And I actually jumped into the ocean. It was very cold. But yeah, and so I really resonated with that, where he says kind of a similar thing of like, I was always this person who cared a lot about important environmental issues. And I found out I was a massive hypocrite. And so I watched this and it changed my perspective immediately on the topic. But at the same time, I was always, I guess when I was vegetarian, I was like, I wasn't good at it, you know, like I would break it constantly because it wasn't based on a deep-rooted ethical stance. And because of that, it was like, fuck it, the planet can handle it if I have a cheeseburger, like while I'm drunk one night or something like that. You know, it wasn't ever something where I really cared enough to make it a lifestyle switch completely. Long story short, I was a photographer, I guess still kind of am, and I quit my job to spend a year backpacking through Latin America. And when I was in Latin America, I was in Bolivia in a wet market. I basically every town I would go to throughout Latin America, sometimes I was bored, and so I got really interested in going to markets. Like markets are so interesting in Latin America, especially there's so many colors, great place to take photos, meet a lot of people, and kind of bargain and do all these cool little things. I don't know, I really loved it. And I was in one in Bolivia in a city called Sucre, and in Sucre they also do the slaughter of the animals inside these wet markets. I had missed the slaughter of the cows. I'd gotten there right as they were cutting the heads off of their bodies, and they were laying the heads of these animals out on this table, and I'd never seen anything like that in my life. You know, they were freshly chopped off heads. And then they were cutting them beyond that. And I remember they laid this cow's head on this table, and this cow reminded me of this dog who I grew up with. His name was Colby. He was a black and white Springer Spaniel, beautiful dog. This cow, black and white cow, looked just like this dog in this moment to me. And I had this massive realization of like, what have I been doing? And it was so powerful. In that moment, I was like, I'm vegan from now on, like not even a question. And I became kind of an activist in some way in that moment as well, and have really stuck with it. And you know, beyond then, I wanted to figure out how I was going to impact the movement, and that led to a lot of things that I'm kind of working on now.
So that was enough to get rid of dairy too.
Everything right there. Wow. It was gone. It was all gone. And to be fair, I probably took a week to make sure I could do it and be healthy. I didn't really know any of that stuff, and I remember I think that night I watched What the Health. What the Health had like just come out, I think, and so but then it was like, okay, I'm done. It was very quick after that. It wasn't even really that I went vegan. I think that wasn't even the biggest part of it. It was that I became an animal rights activist in that moment, pretty much. I knew that I wanted to end this and spend my life trying to end this.
Now, what changed physiologically, mentally, emotionally after that?
Yeah, I actually had right after that I was in Peru. I had a really, really powerful experience drinking ayahuasca in the mountains of Cusco. I won't go into the full story, but that really solidified my answer that I'm kind of meant to be an activist in a way, and that I'm kind of on the right path, or that's how I felt at the time and still do. Yeah, I don't know. Everything kind of changed. My growing up, my mom, she was a lobbyist for many animal ag groups, and so I grew up in a very meat-heavy environment. Her and I remember we would go to county fairs and cook up pork for people when I was a kid and show people how to make these products so that you don't get sick and the right temperatures to cook them and everything. Yeah, I was very in that world. I grew up with many farmers in my life, and so that's just how I was raised. And so it was a very big perspective shift. But I think it was one that was kind of a long time coming. I think once you start learning about what animals go through, and you start learning about the environmental implications of eating animals, it all starts to kind of make sense. And that happened quite quickly.
Wow. In America, it's easy to kind of get away from culture, but where you're at, it was very deep, entrenched in the culture.
Sure.
You know, kill an animal, eat it right then and there, your mom, all the time you spent with her. I mean, this is a big part of, I guess you could call it comfort food and culture. So is there a way to have culture and have the quality of experiences with family and friends and not eat animals?
as you were asking me the question, I was like, yeah, of course you can have culture and be a vegan. But you know what's interesting as you say that is that your culture significantly changes when you're around people who aren't vegan. And that's just a fact, and that's the hardest part. And I guarantee that's the reason that most people decide to no longer be vegan, is because they're in a society that hates it. They're in a society that pushes against it so hard, and eventually you get fucking exhausted, man. You get so tired, and if you're not rooted so strongly in your belief systems, it will get pushed out of you. And that's why, like, I'm never surprised when people aren't vegan anymore. I'm like, fuck, dude, I get it. It's really hard to be vegan. It's a challenge. And we lie to people all the time when we tell them that being vegan is so easy, and oh, it's so easy, you just gotta change a couple things out, and you gotta move your hand 1 foot to the right and pick the non-dairy milk. It's so easy, dude. It's not. It's a fucking challenge. It's a massive challenge. It's incredibly challenging. And it's painful, and it hurts a lot, and it brings you a lot of pain. It makes you open your eyes to a part of society that you wish didn't exist, and in a way you wish you'd never seen, but it's there. And so you can't ignore it once you open your eyes to it. But obviously, culture and all of these things, you can still have a beautiful culture, you can still have a beautiful society without consuming animals. But what I'm getting at is that you change your own culture in a way to morph to that, because when culture is forcing you to consume animals, to exploit animals, and you say, I'm not going to do that anymore, obviously your culture changes. Now that being said, let's say, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a cultural thing. Like I was trying to think of like foods for me that are cultural, and I'm thinking of tacos and spaghetti, one of which is Mexican and the other is Italian. I don't know, I'm from the States, my mom's British, my dad's from Oklahoma. So I don't really have like a cultural food I can think of, but when I think about experiences and things like that are cultural, you can create those without the exploitation of animals and recreate them. But to spend time with the people who still are in that old system and still thinking with the same mindsets that they grew up with, everything changes.
One thing that I think is really beautiful to do with my own son, which I didn't get to do enough, I wish I'd done more, and that is gardening. Seeing things grow, children love that, you know?
Yeah.
And to me, that's a far more valuable and more interesting and dynamic way of having food be a part of your culture.
Of course.
You know?
And you teach them so much.
Yeah.
You teach them that food actually can come from the ground, and it doesn't come from the supermarket, and you don't just reach out and grab it. It actually takes effort, it takes work, it takes moving the soil, it takes a lot of things. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and then you could take it to your family. Maybe they have different things they've grown,
Sure.
and now this culture is far more dynamic. So today we're here at the Animal and Vegan Advocacy Summit. What brought you here?
Yeah, so I'm actually kind of the media team for AVA right now, and so I'm doing just some film work. I'm a documentary filmmaker by trade, and I do some promotional material and stuff like that. It turns out I was already in the US for a short trip when I found out AVA was happening, and so it worked out really, really well in my schedule. And yeah, I'm just offering the support I can with the creative medium, I guess, that I know. And so just kind of trying to give them some better promotional material, so for next year they can promote AVA a lot better, because this year they struggled a lot because they haven't had AVA before, and so it was a challenge to get the word out, you know, if you don't have that content. And so yeah, that's what I'm here doing, and I'm also here to learn and meet other advocates and activists, just be kind of part of the community as well.
So what other kind of stuff do you do as far as like activism? Is there other things?
Yeah, so my major project is a TV series called Planet Vegan. It's all about the vegan movement. It's in 5 parts, and it kind of creates, I would suggest, a non-judgmental and easy entry into learning about what it means to be vegan in the 21st century. And I've been working on that project since 2018. I had the idea in 2017, and when I came up with the idea, it was really this moment of like, this is it. This is what my contribution is to the movement. Like, I'd been searching for it all through my travels through Latin America. I kept wanting to know, like, what am I gonna do, man? Like, I had this experience with these cows, and I was like, I have to figure out a way to help contribute to ending this injustice. And so, yeah, Planet Vegan was born. I was meditating one morning, it came into my head, and then immediately I was like, that's it. And my sister's boyfriend at the time, it all worked out very, very interestingly. My sister's boyfriend at the time was a documentary filmmaker, and I called him and I was like, hey man, I just had this idea, like, I've never picked up a film camera, I have no idea what I'm doing, is this possible? And he was like, honestly man, I know you, I know the passion you have about this project, about this topic, go for it. So Planet Vegan was born. And yeah, it features some pretty big names. Rich Roll is one of the big ones in there. Most of the doctors, Dr. Neil Barnard, Dr. Michael Greger, there's some really, really fantastic people in the series. I was just in LA pitching the series to a couple of different networks, and I'm gonna be coming back to the US in January to do kind of more formal pitching. And yeah, I've signed a contract with a really amazing production company out in LA. They're quite large, and they believe that there's a good home for the series somewhere. And The best thing about them is that they understand that from my standpoint, I really, really, really want it to be seen. The most important thing to me is like, can we get this message out there to the masses? And really our goal is to create a multi-season platform where it becomes something where we're keeping the world updated on the new aspects of veganism that are coming out, because the beauty of this movement is that it is continually growing and evolving massively. And so we just want to act as a medium for people to learn about that story.
Wow, that's awesome. And you said it's a 5-part series.
5-part might become 6. We might split one of the episodes. And it basically transitions people. It starts off with talking about cultured meat and plant-based meat, which in the series we kind of take a stance pro plant-based meat as opposed to cultured meat, but also cultured meat is this thing that's about to happen. It exists. People need to know about it. And so really the idea is to get people to dive into that because it's a very easy topic to jump into. And then it kind of goes through the environmental argument, the health argument, the athleticism argument, masculinity. It talks about a lot of things that need to change. And by the end of it, in episode 4 and 5, I'm like, and it follows my own journey of really realizing my own activism into becoming more animal rights based and only really animal rights based. And so by the end of it, in the 5th episode, I'm like breaking into farms in Australia and rescuing animals and shit like that.
Wow.
There's a big change. And so ideally, you know, first episode, people aren't realizing that. They're like, oh, cool, plant-based meat. I love burgers. Oh, cool, I can get on with that. Second episode, oh, dairy. Like, okay, I can give up dairy. Like, oh yeah, plant-based cheese in Switzerland. That seems cool. I get that. And then by episode 5, I'm hoping they're sitting there like, fuck yeah, save that chicken. You know, like I'm hoping that's kind of how people go. We'll see.
Are you kind of like Kip Anderson, you know, in this?
Yeah. So it's funny. My original intention was not to be involved because I didn't want to be.
Yeah.
And then everyone I talked to was like, there needs to be like the hero's journey that everyone talks about. And it's like, you need someone to follow. So I started getting a little more involved. And now this production company I'm working with, they're like, hey man, you need to be in this. They want to, for future seasons and stuff, they're like, you need to be the host of of this show. And so they even gave me a little bit of a budget to film. I just recently did an Ironman 70.3 in Indonesia where I live because I wanted to test out all these things Rich Roll told me during our interview of like, hey man, you can be an ultra endurance athlete. You can be an endurance athlete. I'm not an ultra endurance athlete, but I did give it a try and it was awesome. I smashed my goals and had a really good time. And so that's a big part of the series now is like I'm putting the things that people are telling to me and I'm testing them. Because I want to know, Rich Roll, are you full of shit, man? And so now I know he's not, dude. Like I wasn't sore a single day from, I participated in an Ironman, man. Ironman 7, it's a half Ironman. I was able to do it. And for the training, for months of training, I was never sore. I didn't have any problems. Like it was something where it just worked. And that's the power of plants, man.
Was there any discoveries like along the way of doing this that you would like to share that were really just like wow moments, you know, like, you know, anything that kind of you didn't expect to be able to accomplish or anything like that or discover? Sure.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest is that through this, I ended up working with the Save Movement, who's now Animal Save Movement. For the first time in my life, I went to slaughterhouses. And that was the first introduction of that. And I'd never seen suffering on such a scale. I remember one in particular, it was like a 3-day vigil in Poland. There was only a small group of activists. We were 8 or 9 people. And we stood outside a slaughterhouse in Poland. It's one of the largest in Europe. And we watched trucks with 250 pigs on each come at a rate that you could not believe for 3 days straight. And it just destroyed all of us, really. Like it took a long time to recover from that. And we filmed, we were even able to get inside the trucks. We filmed from inside. Like there were some slaughterhouse workers who like let us inside a truck and stuff like that. And the whole journey really led me into being an animal rights activist. And that's kind of something that changed fundamentally who I am as a person and changed the way I look at the world and changed the way that I see the problems of the world and the suffering, and really came to understand a lot more about the way I see things and the way the world is. And yeah, I don't know if I ever would have really come to that if I hadn't started filming the series. I owe a lot to the Save Movement, and it just went through a lot with that organization. And I'd say that was probably the biggest change, for sure, was just really, really, and I recommend every activist do it. I know it's hard, but I recommend every activist stare into the eyes of an animal who's seconds from death. It will change you. It will light a fire inside of you that's powerful.
And I feel like it's coming through right now a little bit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an important part too, because I imagine having experienced that, there's just no way you could go back to eating animals.
Sure.
Yeah. Beautiful stuff. I wonder, could you be with somebody who isn't?
You know what's funny is I was seeing a girl where I live. She was just traveling, and so like we met up once. We went on a couple dates, and we had a really good time. And I remember I've talked to and had like a few different interactions with people, and this question comes up quite a bit in like the vegan movement. Like, could you date someone who's not vegan? And I remember it was James Aspie actually. I think there was someone asked him, because James Aspie for a long time at least was looked at like a very hardcore vegan, I guess. And so people would look at him as like someone who could never date a non-vegan, yeah. And I remember someone asked him the question like while he was on stage or something like that, and he was like, yeah, I totally could. And everyone was like, are you fucking joking? Like, you know where you've been and what you've seen? He said, look, like the person who you find in life that you love, you can never guarantee the beliefs they have, and you can never like force them to be someone who they're not. He went on a long spiel, I'm describing it poorly, but I remember thinking like, damn, like that's really interesting. And then recently, for the first time in a very long time, I dated someone who wasn't vegan. It's really hard. Really, really hard, because she's like a non-vegan animal lover, and like all the time we'd see animals and horses and stuff. She'd be like, beautiful. I remember, oh, this was so painful. We were on an island where they travel with horse and carriage still. And so there's horses and buggies all over the place, and these horses are in such pain and suffering. They're slaves. You know, you watch them and you're like, this is slavery in its own right, and not even in its own right, it's slavery. And watching these animals, and I'm sitting there like, I remember we were at a cafe one day, and of course, like I'm eating my fucking vegan meal. She's having chicken. I specifically remember what she ordered. And we're looking out the window and these horses, and she was talking about how beautiful they are. It's such a disconnect, because I was thinking of the horses in that exact moment too, because how could you not? And I'm thinking, what an atrocity that is happening to these beautiful, beautiful creatures. And I'm specifically, we were watching them like train or break one of these horses in, which is where you just like pummel the shit out of them and pull them by the reins and do all these horrifically violent things to them so that they finally give up and say like, all right, I can't fight back anymore. And she was like, wow, this is like what a beautiful animal. And I was like, it's amazing you can see beauty in this situation. Like, we'll never see eye to eye on that. Maybe someday. And like, the funny thing is, she's like, she even like, now she knows some of the arguments. Her and I are no longer dating, by the way, which speaks to things, I guess. But we dated for a month, and we had a good time and everything. And then she left and traveled, and anyway, that's how it went.
Yeah, wow.
I think it's very challenging. Yeah. I think it's very challenging to have such a large ideological difference with someone and have them be your partner, or your whatever, boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever.
What about family, man?
Yeah, family. I have lots of long talks with my mom for sure, and dad. I think I'm in a pretty good place with my family actually about it. There was a long time where they were the ones, and like I very much care about what my family thinks of me, and I look up to them a lot. It's interesting because like you certainly lose respect for people in your life who you share a message with, and they don't listen. At the same time, when you think about like my parents, they've been indoctrinated into a system for decades and decades and decades. It's taught them one thing. Who am I to be able to think that I could ever really unturn that in their life? Like it's hard to inspire people, and it's hard to inspire your family members who grew up with you, and they know all of your downfalls and your lack of commitment throughout life and things like that. They've seen you pitfall on things before, and so they easily can turn that on you, I think, and say like, this is a phase, this is blah blah blah, and you're like, no, this time it's real. And they were like, well, you said that about lacrosse or some shit like that, like whatever, like, you said that about whatever, about marketing or photography, or I don't know. Yeah. Your parents have seen everything about you. And so I think it's easy for them to discount it. But at the same time, especially as activists, like we have often very deep connections with our parents and our family. And we look at them and we just say like, how are you not listening? Mm-hmm. How can I be so upfront with you of all people about something and have you not listen? And and then you hear stories about, I hear a lot more stories about it not going this way, but you hear people tell their parents and their parents like, holy shit, yeah, you're right. I fucked up, and I fucked up raising you. Yeah. And I didn't know any better, and I'm sorry, and
That's so much to admit to.
Exactly. Yeah.
The older you get, the harder, I would imagine,
Definitely, of course.
Wow.
The more time you're indoctrinated.
Yeah, and I guess you're patient with them, And
now I am.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've had fights. I would say I've really never fought with my parents. We've never really had fights growing up. I was kind of more quiet and held things in and stuff like that. And now I've also emotionally learned to release all that, a lot more of that stuff. But the biggest fights we've ever had have been about animal rights and the way that I view it, and the contrast that is in the way that they view it. Certainly.
So how do you stay positive in such a dark world, man?
Great question. Take a break, I would say. I spent, I guess, 2 or 3 years almost constantly going to slaughterhouses, almost constantly. I mean, every week certainly, but there were times where I'd go to a slaughterhouse every day, a different slaughterhouse when I was on tours and stuff like that, activism tours, and you have to take a break. I haven't been on a break from animal rights or anything like that, but I've certainly taken a break from the things that I realized were really harming my mental well-being and were challenging me too much. It's something where, especially in the activism community, there's a certain toxicity where we push each other past our own limits, past perceivable or even believable limits of how we could possibly do this to ourselves. And you end up seeing things and being part of things that are so horrific and then discounting it and being like, oh shit, let's go do that tomorrow. It's like, dude, you need a month of therapy to offset that one moment. Like, you need some time. And now really I've taken, where I live, there's a lot of animal exploitation that's very visible. There's chicken trucks all over the place that you see. It's not like you go on the highway and see a vision of a cow or something like that, like you do in the US or somewhere like that. Where I live, it's you see cows in the back of trucks and you'll drive behind them for 5-10 minutes. You'll see chickens getting slaughtered on the side of the road. It's far more visceral, which in a way I respect because at least people have to see it. But yeah, I would say take breaks, love yourself, read books on how to love yourself in such a deep world that convinces you not to. Learn to love those around you and learn to be open emotionally and fucking cry. You're like, I've come to near tears in this interview multiple times, including now. And just be really, really, really okay with like horrific violence that we have to live through. And be okay and sit with the sadness, the deep sadness that comes with that, because it's so intense. And if you don't feel it, you will have no option but depression. It's the only thing. It's the only option. If you hold all that stuff in, you have no opportunity to feel it. It will be held inside you. It'll cause chronic pain, which is another topic that I'd love to go into at some point. It'll cause all kinds of things that'll make you hate the world. And also, I think a big part of it is like really dive into the beauty of the world, because it is there. And I had started really denying it. I really, really was hating life for years. And I've become such a more positive person really because I took a break and I started to remember that there are so many beautiful people and beautiful places to see and beautiful ways to see them, you know? And like, I think it takes time off to really become that, to remember the happiness and beauty that can exist in the world.
Now, as far as like community, do you have like a tribe?
Funny you say that. Absolutely. I have like very close friends and stuff like that. I've been kind of part of it's hard to describe like my current part of the community that I was part of. A lot of it kind of, I won't go into the details, but there was like a huge, I guess I'll say, incidents of infighting, but also, yeah, a very difficult moment in the community where I lived, where I lived, that caused it to completely fall apart. It was something where we were holding, and I was organizing actually a lot of like vegan meetups, and this was the biggest part of my life actually, was holding like vegan meetups and getting people together and trying to hold a community together. And it kind of all fell apart in front of my eyes, and even in a way I got pushed out of it. That actually taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about the people I was spending time with, and it taught me a lot about the importance of having friends outside of veganism and making sure that the friends that you have aren't only your friends because they're vegan. Because I realized I was spending a lot of time with people who I didn't love, you know, and who I was being influenced by, and I didn't love them. And I think that that's one of the most important things, is that all my friends were animal rights activists. That's all of them. They were street activists. And I was spending and because I was traveling and doing all these things, and even when I settled down a bit more, all my friends were vegan because they were vegan. Not all of them. I have deep friends as well from that community.
You mean they were friends because they were vegan?
That was the only thing we had in common. Yeah. And that was my life was structured around like growing the community and all these things. And really that's what I wanted to do. I held meetups. I led the WhatsApp group, and I went through kind of a lot of suffering really because I was in a state of unease because I was spending time with people who I only had this one thing in common with. And I've realized now that in order to have deep friendships and deep relationships, veganism's not enough. Veganism is such an important thing to hold, but everybody in my life now is vegan. You know, like it's just how it goes. Not everybody, but like the people who I'm the closest with happen to be vegan, and that's just a baseline. I'm not friends with them because they're vegan. I'm friends with them because I love them dearly and they're close to me. And then outside of that now, it's very interesting. Like I play sports, some sports. I'm very into ultimate frisbee. I just organized a tournament for 250 people. It was massive. And they let me kind of take charge of the food. And we had some disagreements, and I basically one day was fully vegan, fully plant-based. It was great. The other day was like 80%. So that's how much I got, which had never happened before, and I was stoked just on that. At the same time, I was also like, fuck, I couldn't get 2 days of fully vegan. That's all I want, guys. And then they were like, come on, dude. Like, you're dealing with 249 non-vegan people, like, and you're the one guy. And I was like, okay, you're right. I learned that by being part of non-vegan communities, you're able to have massive influence. The amount of people that came up to me and they're like, hey man, you smashed it with the food. It was great. Like, we're happy. That means a lot. And I never would have done that before. I wouldn't have stepped, like, I was nervous around non-vegans because all the people in my life were vegan. And what I've realized now is that I can have close relationships with people who are non-vegan. Maybe not date them, but I can have close friendships. I can play sports. I can do all this stuff. And I think that's important, is to not lose those relationships just because there's that ideological difference. Because keep in mind that we were all not vegan. All my travels, I've met hundreds and hundreds of people for filming Planet Vegan. I met one person out of probably thousands. I don't know how many, but in my life at least, one person who was born vegan. That means every single one of us were phenomenally wrong and murdering for the first whatever. For me, 80% of my life. All of us. Always keep that in mind.
I've met a lot of vegans from conception here. Lately.
Really?
Oh, dude,
Only one.
So many.
Wow.
that it's, and I video a lot of them that eventually I'll be doing probably some sort of documentary on it.
Cool.
Yeah. Give me a quick quote.
There's a misconception now that there are a lot of reasons to be vegan. That there's a health aspect, that there's an environmental aspect, a social aspect. Those are all ancillary benefits of adopting a vegan lifestyle. But the only reason to be vegan is because you want to end the massive, massive, massive injustice that is happening to billions and billions, trillions actually, of animals around the world. And it is one of the most mind-opening and life-changing experiences you can take on as a human being. It will light something in not to sound dramatic, but it'll light something in your soul and your body that really makes you, I think, the kind of people we were meant to be. We're meant to be peaceful creatures. I was actually just at a screening of Kip Anderson has a new movie called Christspiracy. It's incredible. And there was a Q&A after, and he brought up a really interesting point. Christspiracy. Oh, Christ. It's incredible. I won't go into the details because you'll just have to watch it, but it's a phenomenal documentary. And they brought up something really interesting, and they said, keep in mind that the word human being, the phrase human being, we chose that. Humans decided what we were going to be called. We chose everything in the language. We picked the term humane. Human is short for humane. Humane being. Of all the things we could have picked, we could have picked cunning, intelligent, fast. Were a lot of impressive adjectives. We chose humane. We chose our ability to insert and engage in compassion in any situation. And yet we've been living out of alignment with that, with the way we treat every single animal that we are supposed to protect on this planet. One of the most aligning things you can do in your life is to end that injustice, at least for your own personal sake. You're not going to be able to control what the people next to you do or what the government does or anything like that, but you can opt out. And you can say, I refuse to harm others. I'm not going to do it. And the second you do that, something really, really does change in your life. You become a new human. And it's one of the most beautiful and empowering experiences you can take on. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't come with challenges and it won't be difficult, but simply by leaving that area in your past, you just become a better person. I don't know, like people bitch about that all the time. Like vegans think they're better people. It's like, I don't think I'm a better person than anybody, but I do think that being vegan is fucking better.
It at least made you feel like you're better than who you used to be.
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a more fulfilled human being. I don't have to go through the gymnastics of wondering, like, am I doing the right thing? I know I'm doing the right thing. It's beautiful.
Man, I appreciate your time so much because I've seen you running around here doing this stuff, and I imagine it's all volunteer, right?
They paid for my flight and some expenses, so it's technically not volunteer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sure.
But you're not getting an hour early rate, right?
Yeah, no.
So that's great that they helped out, and you're definitely doing a good job, man. And I love your energy, and I know you've had a long day, and it's just awesome to have you in front of my cameras, man.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Awesome. Beautiful to be here. Okay, this was meant to be off camera. This is just a funny little story. It has nothing to do with vegan stuff anyway. I was just in LA doing some pitching for Planet Vegan. While I was there, I wanted to like save some money and also like not take Ubers everywhere environmentally and all that stuff. So I rented one of these little city bikes. The reason I just checked my phone and I had a bunch of missed calls and I know what the number's from, which is why I'm bringing this up. So this little city bike system, it's great. It's $17 for a month pass, and they have them in enough areas where it's not super inconvenient, but it's not great, but they're getting there. And you tap your little card and you get your bicycle, and then you ride around, and then you find a new station, put it away, grab your groceries or whatever you're buying, whatever. So took these things all over the place. It was like my way to get around LA. I would ride like 4 or 5 hours a day sometimes. It was awesome. And LA's sketchy. LA is a sketchy place, man. I found places that I like, but the whole time I was there, I was like, this is like really sketchy. It's dangerous. Like I don't feel good here. And that's like, after not leaving Indonesia, which is probably one of the safest places in the world, to like hit down in LA, it was culture shock. And I hadn't left Indonesia in 3 years, hadn't left the country. And it was just like, whoa, this is wild. So my last night, before I leave, I had to leave my hotel at 3 a.m. to come here. And it was like 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock or something. And I was like, I'm hungry. And I know for a fact I'm not gonna have breakfast because I know there's nothing at the airport. I already checked. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go out and get some food. And I was like, am I gonna walk to the place? No, I'll grab a bike. So I grab my bike, I go, a little Mexican spot, and I lean my bike at the door, go in to order, but I'm constantly watching my bike because I can see it through the door. It's a glass door. And I'm like, just in case, I'm gonna keep my eyes on it at all times. Then somebody over on this side, there's like an issue with their order, or they ran out of rice or something. I forget what it was, but they were making a big fuss. And I'm looking over and I'm like, oh my God, is something about to go down in this little spot? And then I think I looked away for 10 seconds. I look back, bike stolen.
You think that was all like planned?
No, I don't. I think I'm just fucking unlucky. And I look back and I'm like, and it was one of those moments where like, I know that didn't just happen. So like, where's the bike? I know there's no chance. And then they have the guy on camera. I went out, there's security cameras in like the parking lot or something, and the guy literally just walks up. He must have been watching through the window. He saw me look away for 10 seconds and was like, it's mine. It's wild. And now that company keeps trying to like talk to me. It's apparently $2,500 to replace the bike. And I'm like, no, it's not $2,500. Like, and this is not that nice of a bike. So I'm gonna try and figure out something. I don't wanna pay for this bike. Like, they must have insurance or something. This is the end of the story. But my bike got stolen in LA. After I walked around for a week feeling like I was gonna get killed, and then like finding places where I was like, oh, this feels cool, this is okay. But yeah. Man, LA.
You know what that reminds me of? So when I first did my first series of these interviews,
yeah,
I was in LA, and I grew up in LA. So,
wow.
And I hadn't been there in a long time. So I'm like, I'm gonna plan one day off to where I can, find a friend or something.
Sure.
I couldn't find anybody. So I called Jan Velez Mitchell. Well, she was COVID scared. So she didn't want to. So I'm like, what am I going to do? Near Venice Beach. So I'm in a rental. I park. And I look around. Everything seems cool. There was a little spot there.
Yeah.
I go out to the beach. I'm hanging out. And some homeless guy yells at me. And I'm like, I'm going to go back to the car. Go back to the car. And the car is gone. So I'm like, what? The car was gone. Now I was worried, because like you got to worry. So I'm looking for the car, but before I even got out of the car, I was like, I'm going to bring my camera bag with me.
Smart.
So fortunately I had that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm like, what the? Maybe I parked it somewhere else. Well, what? So then I'm looking, and there's these people up the road, they're towing people. And I'm like, oh. So I go over there, and they got this down to a pat. They got the security guy giving tickets, and then they tow. Security tow. And I'm like, but there was no sign. Oh, there was a tree covering the sign. So I'm like, dude. And they're like, I don't care. So then I call an Uber. The Uber comes, and the guy's like, and he's taking me to the address I put in the Uber thing, in the app. And I'm like, does this happen often? He's like, I don't speak English, in Chinese or whatever. He's like, doesn't know what to say. So I'm like, well, I better call to make sure I'm going to the right place. And Sure enough, they're like, oh, you need to go to a different place. Well, I'm trying to tell this guy, and he doesn't speak any English.
Wow.
So I have to cancel it, and then he drops me off in the middle of nowhere. My phone's dying. I'm falling out of the car. Homeless people are all around me looking at me crazy. And then I'm like, okay, I gotta get another Uber. So I get another Uber to a different address. The same guy comes back and picks me up, takes me to this other location, and it's like, I get there, he drops me off. And then the guys that are towing people come out of this like location where it's all gated, and I'm like, is my car in there? No. It was at the other location. So I had to call another Uber. I get to the other, $500 later, I get my car back.
Your rental.
But they told me, you have to prove it. So I had to go to the car first and actually get the paperwork. So that's the reason why I had to get to the car first.
Wow.
So anyway, yeah, you reminded me of that.
Sure.
So it's like whenever I do these interviews, this is all I can do. If I try to do anything else, I'm afraid something's going to happen.
Sure.
When you're a pilot, they call it, you have to keep a sterile cockpit.
Yeah. Stay focused.